Good morning, Dog Nation. I'm Brandon Adams. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro. Loaded on the program here today. Two great guests. It's Jake Fromm before we're done. It is Connor Riley in just a moment. I think we have an example today of Kirby Smart sort of in diabolical fashion, kind of doing what he does best. We'll give you what we're talking about on that. And to kick things off the top of the show here today, there is something that football fans, I think, conventionally believe to be true, and yet, like a lot of things in life, what is commonly assumed to be true oftentimes just isn't. Example of that here to kick things off and how that relates to Georgia specifically. It is all on the way. It is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by Serve Pro, and it begins right now.
Today's episode of DawgNation Daily is brought to you by Serve Pro, cleaning, restoration, construction.
Presented by DawgNation.com. This is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans. Here's your host, Brandon Adams.
We concluded yesterday's show by telling you that yesterday was the official 10th anniversary date of the start of DawgNation.com. We're also celebrating, obviously, the 10th anniversary of DawgNation Daily here, too. So as we get rolling here today, for those of you watching on video, one of the things you will notice for this season, we're going to kind of adopt a special logo. You know, I try not to be too self-serving. There are things that matter to me more so than matter to you. In this particular case, though, I do have to kind of beg your pardon here a bit. I am really proud of 10 years. You know, when you do a lot of media stuff, and a lot of jobs function this way, media certainly does, longevity is just not promised to any of us. And so to think that here we are 10 years later after beginning the show, not just still going, but hopefully still going strong, I have to say I am personally very proud of that. Professionally speaking, there's nothing I'm more proud of than the 10 years I've been able to do DawgNation Daily presented by Serve Pro. So thrilled about that here today. And for this season, you're going to see that reflected with our graphic as you notice. And for those of you listening to the podcast, what it is, it's our traditional logo with a D&D 10. And obviously a reminder that this is our 10th anniversary. A lot of media entities like this, certainly podcasts. I think the average duration of podcasts is like 5 or 6 episodes, fewer than 10, I believe. That's the common thing there. And here we are going on, you know, more than 2,500 episodes and now full 10 years of doing this show 5 days a week, which is obviously just an unbelievable privilege for all of you. So we like to jump straight to things. So after saying all of that, let me kind of jump into this here today. The coaches poll came out yesterday. And of all the days that we do this show prior to the start of the season, coaches poll, AP poll, the real preseason polls, when they come out, that is for me just about as much fun as it ever gets. It's one of those things where, and I'm sort of a child at heart. You know, I try to stay kind of childlike. I'm sort of a child at heart. The sort of kid in me comes out when the poll comes out. I just sort of like looking at it. You know what I'm saying? I just sort of stare at it and kind of look at who's ranked where, and I'll kind of read it several times. You know, it's one of those things. It's just sort of interesting to see. In fact, we'll all do this together here right now, at least for those of us on video. Texas coming in at number 1, Ohio State 2, Penn State 3, Georgia 4, Notre Dame 5, Clemson 6, Oregon 7, Alabama 8, LSU 9, Miami 10. That makes up your top 10 of the coaches poll. It is just sort of an interesting thing to pay attention to. However, there is a degree of conventional wisdom that's out there. In fact, we talked about this last week because I guess the Big Ten, you know, not content with all the stuff they've already ruined. They want to ruin this for fans too. I guess there's some belief coming out of Big Ten circles, as reported by Adam Rittenberg, ESPN, that maybe they'd like to do away with the preseason polls. They don't like preseason polls anymore. They don't think they're particularly helpful. And as some media people say, and as frankly is kind of considered to be sort of conventional wisdom around the sport, that, hey, this may be somewhat fun for fans, but the polls themselves aren't very accurate. They're not very important. This is all essentially a useless exercise. That is kind of the I guess the thought that's sometimes out there. In fact, on the occasion of, like, say, Arizona State, who comes in at number 11 in this preseason poll, as put out by the coaches yesterday, Kenny Dillingham, the Arizona State coach, was even asked about that. Hey, what'd you think about your team only being ranked after being in the college football playoff a year ago? What'd you think about your team only being ranked 11th in this year's preseason coaches poll? And as an example of what sort of stands as conventional wisdom, this very short, extraordinarily sarcastic quote from Kenny Dillingham, I think sort of sums that up. This is from yesterday.
About it and stuff like that.
Yeah, I mean, polls are always accurate, so I think we should really lean into it.
Yeah, you hear the laugh, and if you're watching on video, you see the sort of self-satisfied look. He thinks he's kind of got a zinger in there. These polls, well, they're always accurate, so we should definitely lean into all of this here for this season. But and hopefully every now and then we're able to give you something that you might not get a lot of other places. Perhaps this is a little bit of an example of that right now. That what Dillingham says sounds like what a lot of media says, sounds like what some fans say. That somehow this coach's poll, it's fun, and it sort of hypes up the season. It makes some of the week 1 games feel bigger than they might otherwise feel. But the actual exercise itself of ranking these teams before any games play, well, that actually is pretty meaningless, and that actually is very distorted, some would tell us, and just ripe with inaccuracies. And yet this is an example, I believe, of conventional wisdom just being wrong. Now, here's what we're going to do for like 2 seconds. We are going to really, really nerd out. Now, I'm not smart enough to be a nerd. Many of you know this. I was not a good student. I can do no math beyond just basic arithmetic. So I make no bones about this. I'm not really smart enough to be a nerd, but I sometimes trick people into thinking that I'm smarter than I am because I am curious. That's one thing I really am. I'm a very curious person, not super educated or like wildly intelligent necessarily, but genuinely pretty curious. And so I read a lot of nerdy people, even though myself, I'm oftentimes not all that nerdy to make sense of everything that I'm being told. There is an example of this, and I don't think this guy would mind being called a nerd. I'm actually not even sure he's publishing current content, but for a long time, he published a lot of analytic stuff in kind of the college athletic space. His name is Ed Fang, and he used to have a blog called The Power Rank back during the sort of blog era of college sports media stuff. And it's about 10 years old now, he once wrote a very interesting piece about the fact that there are a lot of people who think the preseason polls are totally meaningless, and yet in actuality, they are far more accurate than you perhaps realize. Let me show you this on the screen. It's a lot of information. I'm going to try to go through this quickly and try not to make it too nerdy, but I do think this is pretty interesting. I do think this is relevant as it relates to Georgia. What Fang writes is, the preseason polls might seem worthless for making predictions. The humans of the AP and coaches have no games upon which to base their ballots. It seems more reasonable to wait until later in the season to look at these polls. However, Ed Fang writes, this is a mistake. The preseason AP and coaches poll have remarkable predictive power, even during bowl season. He says human polls from later in the season do not. Now, I want you to listen to this very carefully. I want you to make sense of this because I think this is both interesting and important if you'll just try to stick with me. Ed Fang is going to make the case that the preseason polls are more accurate at predicting who will win bowl games than the late season polls. That totally defies conventional wisdom, but as Fang points out, it's somewhat true. That if you look at the who's ranked where in the coaches and also the AP poll and compare that in bowl season to, preseason higher ranked team playing lower ranked or preseason ranked playing unranked, even in a case where it's a team that sort of also receives votes, even this sort of works out. He says over the past 10 years, a sample of 339 bowl games, the preseason coaches poll, now listen to this, predicted 59.9% of bowl game winners. There were 67 games where it made no prediction because neither team was ranked. But in the situation where it was either ranked versus ranked or ranked versus unranked, the preseason coaches poll predicted 59.9% of winners. The actual point spread itself only predicted about 60% of the winners. So hear this from Ed Fang, that the preseason coaches poll will predict the winner of a bowl game, not the who covers the spread, but who actually wins the game, about as frequently as the team that's favored wins the game. In other words, that's a pretty strong case that the actual preseason poll itself is remarkably predictive. It has great predictive powers in determining how the rest of the season is going to play out. And I would say from the standpoint of Georgia, that is a very good thing, because when you have this consistent tool that comes out every year that does have a fairly strong level of predictiveness to it, well, all of a sudden you can look at and you can at least have some parameters for how to have a conversation about this year. In fact, if you don't mind, can we put that graphic from the beginning of the show of the top 25 back up here again? Georgia coming in at number 4. History would suggest that's a pretty good place to be in all of this. If you want to kind of think about in this current decade that we're in, skip the pandemic, also go back to like, say, the sort of the decade kind of period, prior to that, and what's sort of been the college football playoff era. When you look at teams that have won the national championship, the farthest we've seen any team come to win the national championship since 2017 is LSU, that started the year preseason number 6, won the national title in 2019. When Georgia won the title in 2021, it was a preseason number 5. When Georgia won the national title in 2022, it was a preseason number 3. It's been since 2017 since a preseason number 1 has actually won the national championship, but the national champion in all of those years, while not ranked number 1, has at least been in the top 6, if not top 5 or top 3. The last 2 national champions, both Michigan and Ohio State, were a preseason number 2. So in other words, this is not a guarantee of anything, but you would much rather be Georgia coming in at number 4 than, say, Alabama coming in at number 8. If you look at power rankings and things like that from the various analytic sites, they think of Georgia and Alabama as obviously 2 very closely aligned teams. Alabama, of course, beat Georgia last year in what most people thought was a thrilling game. So in a lot of ways, Alabama and Georgia are thought to be equals. But according to the coaches poll and the history that's dictated kind of by this, Georgia far more likely to win the national championship than Alabama would be. Alabama is outside of the range that national champions typically come. And of course, with trends, they're sort of true until they're not. That could change at any point. But if Alabama were to be better than Georgia this year, if it were to win a national championship, it is clearly bucking a trend by doing so. Does that make sense? Any questions? Now, let me give you one more small point. So if you look at the best of Georgia, 2021 coming from preseason number 5 to win the national title, 2022 coming from preseason number 3 to win the national title, or if you want to even count 2017, kind of coming from completely off the radar to win the SEC, make the playoff, and play for a national title. What has happened in those years when Georgia has exceeded the preseason expectations, now that we have firmly established that the preseason predictions are actually more accurate than you realize? Well, in every one of those instances, something about Georgia turned out to be far more true than folks realized. For instance, in 2022, despite the fact that Georgia was the reigning national champions, most people weren't so sure about Stetson Bennett, and most people kind of thought that Georgia had lost too much from the previous year's team. What they didn't realize is that Bennett would be a Heisman finalist at quarterback, and weapons like certainly Brock Bowers and to a certain extent Ladd McConkey too, with a sort of high-powered pass-catching weapons that gave Georgia a chance to be truly elite on offense to match still a top-flight defense. Previous year, I don't think anyone in the national media realized that Georgia would go on to have 5 first-round picks off that defense. Georgia almost always good defensively, but I don't think anybody realized they were going to be as good as they were. That's how they exceeded their preseason ranking so much. 2017, it was probably a far better rushing attack than folks realized. Nick Chubb had a good year in 2016, became kind of cementing himself as sort of an all-time great along with Sony Michel in 2017. That in the best of Georgia, they have just demonstrated something during the season that wasn't quite apparent on paper before that year began. And I can't promise you that's going to happen this year, but I can tell you this. Conventional wisdom about the coaches poll is wrong. It's actually far more predictive, based on the math nerds, than most of us sort of realize. And with Georgia coming in at a preseason number 4, long-standing history would dictate that Georgia is still very much in the national championship race. And much like 2021 and 2022, the Dogs provided a few surprises. There could be some surprises in store for this season as well. My name's Brandon Adams, and this is DawgNation Daily, the daily podcast for Georgia Bulldogs fans, presented today by ServPro. Enjoying our 10th anniversary, and happy to have you with us for it as we do. And of course, happy to have you checking in on video. We do live 10 a.m. across all, video platforms on demand after that. Radio, Athens Sports Radio 960, The Rev, podcast, wherever you find them, including the world-famous DawgNation.com. We're thrilled that you're a part of it. Big thanks to our friends at ServPro who make it all possible for you there as well. And obviously, ServPro stands ready to help you in a super challenging time. If you're a homeowner, if you've got, commercial property, or if you have rental property, passive income related real estate, big time damage can occur. And, we've kind of gone through what has been a very rainy last few days. The other day it came a huge rainstorm, a lot of water. And obviously a lot of water can lead to a lot of damage. Roofs can cave in. There can be leaks. Sometimes it's a water pipe to burst, or more serious, even sometimes fire, things like that. These are all real things that can happen. When it happens to you, you want that mess cleaned up. You want it all put back together like it never even happened. That's your wish anyway. That's where our friends at ServPro can be an incredible help to you on that. They are restoration specialists. That means to use just basic language here, they specialize in restoring your property. They can get it looking just like it did before all this ever happened, which is honestly what you want in every one of these situations. Also, each ServPro franchise, independently owned and operated. That means you're doing business with someone who is absolutely as committed as you are to a satisfactory outcome, because that's what their livelihood depends on. So you can trust our friends at ServPro. They want to work for you. The restoration specialists are standing by right now. Big, large-scale jobs, smaller scale stuff, it's all important to you, so it's important to them. Find them online. It's servpro.com, SERV, servpro.com for a lot more on that. All right, fun show for us. It's Jake Fromm later on. A lot to get into with Jake here coming up in a little bit. It's also Connor Riley in a couple of seconds too. But prior to that, let's get ready to go around the doghouse here today. And on our show today, I want to get ready to welcome in. And listen, how do you make it 10 years? How do you have the success that we've been able to have? And I'm thankful for it. Certainly don't take it for granted. It's terrific sponsors, including those who've been with us for a long time. And so thankful for those who are still joining us fresh and new on a regular basis. And today we introduce a brand new sponsor that you're going to hear a lot about in the years to come. And for many of you, it may be sort of a brand new thing in general. But I can tell you, after spending some time with them the other day, it's going to be a fun part of a lot of the stuff you have going on here during football season, or anytime you're getting together with family and friends. I'm talking about Mercier Orchard's Hard Cider. Happy to have them as a part of Around the Doghouse here today. More on them coming up in a moment. But first, there's a piece of content that comes out every year around this time. College football writer named Bruce Feldman writes what he calls his Freaks List. These are athletic freaks, athletes that go beyond just the typical expectations. They're bigger, stronger, faster in some form or fashion. And this is the sort of thing that we sort of expect Georgia to kind of over-index on. We expect Georgia to have a lot of freaks. Typically speaking, they kind of would. But this year, in kind of a weird way, Georgia only had one name on this list. To go back to a previous topic of, if Georgia's going to win the national championship, they're going to have to be better than people realize, at least somewhere. Maybe this is an example of this. What is going on with Georgia only having one so-called freak, according to a national writer, Bruce Feldman, who's been compiling this list for a good number of years? Well, when you dive into the list, I think you see a little bit more about what's going on here. In fact, this may be rarely seen in the wild, a perfect example of Kirby Smart at sort of his diabolical best when it comes to the sort of thing that he does. So obviously we would know this. For a national writer, I don't care how smart they try to pretend to be, none of these guys know every player in college football. That's just a mirage. That's simply not true. They rely on information from others to be able to compile the content they create, especially when it comes to a list of the top 100 athletic freaks in college football. A lot of this is going to come from the sources involved. Well, with that in mind, let me read this to you from The Athletic, Bruce Feldman's outlet. What he wrote about Micah Morris, who comes in as the 96th most athletic freak in college football here for this year. Listen to what Feldman writes. He says the 6'4", 330-pound redshirt senior is the guy the staff, meaning the Georgia coaching staff, the guy the staff sees as the biggest freak in the program. Now, listen, we think Micah Morris is a terrific part of this Georgia offensive line. C.J. Allen, among others, have called him the strongest player on the team. So we got no beef with Morris being a freak and ready to sort of show what he's all about in Georgia here this year. But why doesn't Georgia have more players on a list like this? Well, if all of this is coming from the staff, this is exactly what the so-called staff, meaning the Georgia coaches, this is sort of what they want. No attention on anybody else. Think about all the players that could have perhaps ranked on a list like this. No attention for them. Instead, let's highlight our extraordinary veteran, Micah Morris, who kind of predates most of the players in this roster all the way back to the national championship era. Let's make sure people know he is our athletic freak. Doesn't this feel like sort of Kirby Smart sort of doing what Kirby Smart does? Well, in light of this, let me also give you a clip here. Morris spoke to reporters the other day, and he talked about, as I said before, he's been here now for a while, even back to the national championship era, what has kept him around Georgia for all of this time. I like this from Micah Morris. You'll like it too. Take a listen.
This is my home. This is where I committed to. This is where I wanted to be whenever I was a 17-year-old kid. So at the end of the day, you started it, you got to finish it. And me personally, I know that I could develop here, whether it might not be me starting every game, but like I said, the knowledge that I gained from the older guys at the time whenever I was young, now I'm being able to pay it back to the younger guys now with me being an older guy. I mean, this is the school that I love, and I'm happy it's here.
So, listen, we got no problem Micah Morris being celebrated as an athletic freak. We believe he is, certainly from a strength standpoint, huge part of this Georgia offensive line. How come more Georgia players don't get recognized on a list like this? Because apparently that's exactly how Kirby Smart wanted it to be. And that is Around the Doghouse, poured today by our friends at Mercier Orchards Hard Cider. Now, this is a brand new sponsor for us and a really fun thing for you if you've never tried the hard cider before that's made with the delicious apples and fruits grown with our friends at Mercier Orchards, which is right here in the great state of Georgia. The other day, we showed you a picture of us. We were right there in Blue Ridge, Georgia, gorgeous orchard that stretches a couple hundred acres up there in the mountains of North Georgia. This is one of the most beautiful, most picturesque things that you're ever going to see. And homegrown right there in our state is this delicious hard cider for you to try, made with these wonderful apples. I got to tell you, for me, this is a brand new beverage experience, something I've never quite had before, but it was absolutely extraordinary. First of all, it's naturally gluten-free, so you love that. It's a real farm-to-glass experience, meaning this is the sort of thing that's grown right there on the farm. It's packaged, it's made right there, and then delivered right there to you. And you may be hearing, well, B, I've never heard of Mercier Orchards hard cider. I'm telling you right now, this is one of those things you're going to want to try. And as you're shopping at your local supermarkets, at your local restaurants and beverage stores and things like that, I want you to look for Mercier Orchards hard cider. And if you don't see it, I want you to ask for it. It's a great way to support a great local business right here in our state that honestly, if you love the great taste of a hard cider, if you deserve, if you love the really interesting flavors that kind of come out of this and all the creative ways they're blending this together, I think you're going to love this yourself. So ask for it as you're shopping at your local supermarket, beverage stores, restaurants. You can get it in the can. It kind of gets poured off the tap. It is a wonderful, wonderful experience. Incredible flavors. I can tell you that firsthand. And if you want to kind of explore this more on your own, you can go to mercier-orchards.com/hard-cider. It's Mercier, and that's spelled M-E-R-S. Let me try that one more time. M-E-R-C-I-E-R. That's how you spell Mercier, M-E-R-C-I-E-R. So the website, once again, Mercier-orchards.com/hard cider. You're going to love Mercier Orchards hard cider, and we're very happy to have them pouring around the doghouse for us here today. Happy to have all of you with us here, too. It's Jake Fromm later on. For now, Connor Riley today, though, on Georgia and the Coaches Poll, the so-called freaks around this Georgia program, and a lot more here today on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro.
From Athens and across the SEC or wherever the recruiting trail may lead, here's a DawgNation.com insider.
Connor, I don't know if you're like me, but when you see the Bruce Feldman thing and the fact that the 100 so-called freaks in college football. Now, I don't expect any national writer to know like Elias Williams or Justin Williams or Chris Cole. Like these are still kind of sort of backup type players at Georgia. They're not household names necessarily. You're at practice, I think you would say, to the naked eye, Georgia's probably got just as many sort of called freaks as it's probably ever had, all that it needs, certainly here for right now. And you're left to wonder, well, how come there aren't more guys on a list like this? And then you read the write-up from Feldman who's like, well, this is the guy the staff says is their athletic freak. It's sort of, I think, a perfect distillation of the sort of Georgia coaching staff led by Kirby Smart sort of doing what they do best, which is controlling the information flow. I found that to be a very fascinating look at the obvious process that seems to be going on here.
Yeah, a couple of things on this. Feldman has been doing this for a long time. As just a general college football fan, it is interesting to read. But in following it, especially from a Georgia-specific angle, I don't believe that Feldman is all that well connected with the Georgia staff. And so that's why I think you don't see a lot of representation on this list. I would also note, BA, do you know the team that is most represented on Feldman's list this year?
Is it Alabama?
It is Penn State, actually.
Okay.
Penn State, 5 players on there. Now, Penn State doesn't necessarily recruit in the same waters that, say, Georgia does. But, BA, can you also tell me which broadcast networks has rights to Penn State football games?
That would be Fox. That would be Fox.
And do you also know who happens to employ Bruce Feldman?
Yeah, Bruce Feldman, you can be seeing him on the sidelines of Fox broadcasts.
Yeah, just connecting the dots there. That's why maybe it sometimes seems there's a little bit more of a Big Ten flavor when it comes to Feldman's freaks list than it does perhaps SEC teams. But I challenge any reporter out there to go out to a Georgia practice. Go look at Joseph Jonah-Ajayi and tell me that guy is not one of the first 15 players off a college football player bus in terms of the most impressive prospects you will see. And so I know, Georgia only having one player, Georgia having him all the way down at 96, felt very much like a Feldman, including him, because if I don't have a Georgia player, I'm just going to catch hell for it. Given how many Georgia players have gone on to the NFL, how many of them had dominated at the combine and just continue to look like an NFL factory. Georgia's got plenty of freaks on this team. I'm not even necessarily sure if I would put Micah Morris in my own personal top 5 freaks on this team. But that Morris is the guy that gets the nod, I think only lends further credence to your theory that this is just Georgia, trying to fly under the radar, not get all that high, and not have a lot of guys that dominate preseason headlines.
So for like 2 seconds, let's reverse engineer this the other way. You're a media savvy person. If like People Magazine's coming out with the sexiest whatever, or if Entertainment Weekly back in the day is coming out with like the hottest stars, these lists are not organic. This is all sort of preordained by PR teams and things like that. There's a push for this sort of thing. So if we see, for instance, more Penn State players than anything, 3 Alabama offensive linemen in the top 10, I'm going to reverse engineer this that, well, if there are no Georgia players in here because Georgia didn't want any, then if there's a huge number of Alabama in the top 10 or Penn State on the list throughout, then somehow those programs are working hard to market their players and get that attention for them, which maybe suggests the sort of try-hard behavior that's ultimately destined to fall flat. Is that reading too much into this to perhaps see it that way?
I do not. I find the push around Alabama, I would say specifically in the last 6 weeks, really since the run-up to media days, and then through there, has been very interesting in terms of the program was flying a little under the radar the last couple of months into this offseason. They don't make the playoff last year. They have to replace a quarterback in Jalen Milroe, who some people don't like, but ask Georgia fans, that guy when he was on, was as good as any player in college football was a season ago. And so it's an interesting year going into Alabama. I also find it interesting, today, the sort of Drive to Survive version of SEC football arrives on Netflix, the big brands don't end up participating in that. I don't believe Alabama's in it. I don't believe Texas is in that. We know Georgia isn't in it. But I'll be very interested in seeing sort of what the effect ends up having on teams, on players, and do players start to see moving forward, hey, like especially in an NIL world where I do think your viability and viewability on Netflix is going to translate to real advertising dollars in my mind. I'll be very interested in seeing how Georgia goes about that moving forward, because for those that know and remember, in the first season of Drives to Survive, when that came out, I believe back in either 2017 or 2018, the two biggest F1 teams at the time, Mercedes and Ferrari, did not participate. But Red Bull did, and Red Bull got a whole lot of PR for relatively low risk. And it's not all that surprising that the second season did see Mercedes and Ferrari willingly participate. And I'd be interested in see if maybe that's something that happens with Georgia moving forward.
I want to talk about the preseason coaches poll. Connor, I don't like it. I love it. I just could pour over preseason polls for hours. In fact, I spent a good bit of time on this one yesterday. I think it's interesting from about 1,000 different angles. But as I said off the top of the show, the thing I love about it is the way that it defies conventional wisdom. People think, well, the preseason poll is bad because we haven't seen any games, but the polls get better as we see more information. The opposite is true. This is the most accurate reflection of kind of a general consensus of what teams are. Not precisely accurate, but directionally true. And as we get information by way of games, now we overreact. We move teams down for losing. We move teams up for winning. And the polls, according to the data experts, they actually get worse as the season progresses. That if you want the best snapshot, imprecise, but still the best, it's the preseason poll that you would actually look at. From that standpoint, I cannot get enough of the preseason AP and the coaches poll. They're as fun for me today as they were when I was 10 years old. Do you enjoy them as much as I do?
I do. I think there's been a push recently to do away with these, both from a coach perspective, but even some in the media perspective, which is just perplexing. I mean, one, it gives us something to talk about too. Like, fans absolutely eat this up. And while, yes, I think the people that traditionally watch DawgNation Daily are diehard Georgia fans, they are consuming this thing 365. I think for a lot of college football fans, like the preseason poll and the AP coaches and the AP poll are sort of the signifier to the common fan, the average fan that is maybe not invested 365 because they've got other things going on, that, hey, college football is here, and this is who you sort of start needing to pay attention to, and this is how the top teams are seen in this sport moving forward. So I enjoyed this stuff. I think we're going to keep doing it. I hope we're going to keep doing it. I know that everyone wants to change everything nowadays, but like the preseason poll, to me, it still matters. It's still interesting. And it's an interesting tastemaker, I think, for what this season is going to look like. And specifically, like, you can look at the SEC and you can look at the Big Ten. In the Big Ten, like, I do find it interesting that they still have Ohio State over Penn State, even though Penn State seems to be a little bit more in vogue in terms of what they return. Whereas conversely, in the SEC, despite the evidence we saw on the field last season where Georgia beat Texas twice, they've now got Texas over Georgia. And I just find it all very interesting in sort of seeing how this all comes together, especially when, you know, here we are such a Georgia-focused show as we have been now for the past 10 years. Congratulations there to everyone here. It's just very interesting to sort of see how the rest of the sport is seen.
So as a pro-Georgia person, I think Georgia at 4th is awesome. I really do. And I compared it to Alabama a moment ago, where if you look at Georgia coming from 5th to win in 2021, LSU coming from 6th to win in 2019, that there is a range of potential national champions that doesn't seem to stretch to the bottom part of the top 10. You know, you just don't have teams kind of come out of nowhere with a national championship. So compare Georgia at 4 to, like, say, Bama at what, 8? Much better to be Georgia today than I think Alabama, if the history of the coaches poll is our guide.
Yeah, I think that of the teams on that list that you see right there, I would flip Oregon and Alabama. I am on record as being a little bit higher on Alabama. I have Alabama getting to the SEC championship game, and if they get to the SEC championship game and they're playing Georgia, I'm going to pick them to beat Georgia because I don't pick Georgia to beat Alabama anymore. But I look at that list, And I think there are 7 teams on it that can win a national title. And even within that 7, I have some skepticism in terms of how it's all going to come together. I agree. I think every team on that top row can win a national title, including Notre Dame there. Clemson, I'm willing to give the benefit of the doubt because Dabo Swinney has done it before, albeit not in a 12-team playoff. But the ACC is so weak that I think that that's going to make things a little bit easier for Clemson to get there. And then I have Alabama as that 7th team. And then after that, it's really it. I don't necessarily believe in Oregon just yet. I want to see a little bit more success out of them. LSU, for as much as we talk about Garrett Nussmeier and what he brings to the table, I'm very curious to see what this team looks like, given they got to replace 4 starters on the offensive line for a season ago. I know there's going to be some ACC dark horse out there that we don't see. I'm not counting Miami. I'm not counting SMU. Is that maybe a Louisville as your ACC dark horse to potentially make the college football playoff? But in terms of true national title contenders, I think it's 7 teams. And even in a transfer portal era and even in an expanded college football playoff era, that's about where it's been in line for the past 15 years or so. And so those 7, that top 5, and then Clemson and Alabama, which really isn't all that different than it was, say, 6-7 years ago.
So one of my favorite things with the poll, too, is while it's directionally accurate, nothing's perfect. And almost every single year, you could literally sit here and watch this. A team ranked in the top 10 to begin the season will finish the season unranked. It happens almost every year. Do you have a candidate from this year's preseason top 10 to finish unranked?
Unranked is, the easy answer is either Alabama or LSU because of the schedule and the way that it breaks for those specific teams and that they're going to play so many teams on that schedule. LSU, they have a game at Alabama. They play Ole Miss. They have a game at home against South Carolina. They get Texas A&M, though I believe that game is at home this year. They get Oklahoma, who is, I believe, number 26. So it's easy to see things breaking badly for LSU. Can I give you a team where I don't necessarily think that they're going to finish outside the top 25, but I could see them finishing with 3 losses and they're in that top 10 and thus not making the college football playoff in my mind and finishing lower than what people expect?
Let me hear it.
What about Texas? This Texas team, look, they got to replace a lot from last year. And yes, I think they conversely bring back some stars that maybe Georgia doesn't necessarily have. But you look at that schedule, and last year, look, it was as easy as a schedule as you're going to see from them. Week 1, they go on the road to Ohio State, a very losable game. They're not going to have the 2 best players in that game in Jeremiah Smith and Caleb Downs. While it doesn't necessarily mean a ton as it does in football compared to, say, like a basketball, it is something, and I think everyone would agree that's a game Texas could easily lose. Early October, they have to go on the road to Florida. That's, if DJ Lagway is healthy, and that's a huge if, that's a very losable game in my mind, especially when it comes the week, I believe, before they play Oklahoma. And then they got to go to Georgia, which, as I think we all know and understand, that's a game Georgia is going to be frothing at the mouth for and eager to play in and eager to get the best of Texas, given the way some things have transpired this offseason. Those are 3 games all away from Austin that are eminently losable. And then you throw in rivalry games like Texas A&M and Oklahoma. It's a very tricky schedule for Texas this year where they got to replace a lot. They've got a lot riding on Arch Manning. And it's an easy world to see them, while everyone has them penciled in as the number 1 team right now and a surefire college football playoff team. I, maybe more than the average fan, is willing to see a world where Texas does stumble a little bit this season.
So I'm trying to limit my gambling talk, not always successfully. I'm really fascinated, in a little bit of a buyback on the loser of the Texas-Ohio State game. That I think we have massive overreaction coming to whoever loses that game. But Connor, that's as good a week 1 game as I think I've ever seen. Like, that is a clash of the Titans. The loser of that game is not out of anything. So it's almost like, I think you could almost sit this out. Either team could lose, and either team could still win it all. So I think whether it be a season win total or actual just a, win the national championship, I think from a value standpoint, on a prediction standpoint, but just a value standpoint, I think there could be really big value on the eventual loser of the week 1 Ohio State-Texas game.
So if you believe that one of those teams is capable of winning a national title and you want to invest some money in that, I would say wait until that first game and then pounce. Now, like the Vegas odds and the way that they do sports books and setting lines and things like that now is so greased and it's so difficult. But I do think that there's going to be a little bit more on your side of, okay, you've dropped that first game, but there's still enough talent in there to get to the end of the season. Because as our crack producer, Kaylee Menzel, points out, the number 1 and number 2 team in the coaches poll to open the season have never met in game 1, and that's going to be happening this season.
Let me give you that's a really interesting stat. Let me give you a contrast to that. I do not feel the same way about Clemson LSU. Connor, LSU has put all of its eggs in the basket of beating Clemson. And given how bad they've been week 1, I don't think that's necessarily a bad idea. But if they don't, the quit factor for that team after that, because let's face it, they've had some quit factor last couple of years anyway, the quit factor for that team may get real high real fast. And conversely, this is a Clemson team that sports a really nice preseason ranking, but against elite teams last couple of years have not looked the part. If you can't beat LSU in week 1, my suspicion is you're the same team that couldn't beat Texas last year, got blown out by Georgia, that you may be beating all the ACC teams, but you're not beating anyone of real consequence. So what I'll say about value on the loser of Ohio State, Texas, I do not feel the same way as for instance, about the value of the loser of another really fun game like LSU Clemson.
The loser of that game, the Clemson LSU game, it can't be taken as a serious team to win a national title. It's not saying they can't rebound and make the college football playoff, go on and have a nice season. But if Clemson, is going to win a national title, they're going to have to beat a team like LSU. And quite frankly, they're going to have to beat teams better than LSU. And then as you lay out perfectly, I think with LSU, look, they've lost, I believe, 4 straight week 1 games, all of them under Brian Kelly since he has taken over as the head coach there. There's been a lot put into this season from the transfer portal perspective in terms of what they've invested. They bring Garrett Nussmeier back for another season. If you can't beat Clemson in week 1, and I recognize that's going to be a very difficult game because I believe it is being played at Clemson, but if you can't beat that game, how can you then be expected to turn around and go through a week in, week out SEC schedule that you're going to have to navigate? And if you lose that game, you have an even slimmer margin of error to work with. So while, again, national title, I don't know if that's in the card for either of those teams. The loser of that game, I'm willing to put out there and say they cannot be taken seriously from that point forward.
There's more we could discuss, but we'll leave it there for right now. Looking forward to coverage from you. Let me see if I can go to the right camera here for a second. Looking forward to coverage from you tomorrow as the Georgia assistant coaches, Mike Bobo and others, speak to the media. That should be a fascinating day to get more insight on this team. I know you'll write plenty about that. Connor, we appreciate your time here on DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. Thank you so much for being a part of our 10 years here, both on the website and on our show. An invaluable member of our team and certainly a good friend. So I appreciate that. We'll look forward to talking to you again very soon.
Yep, as always, and will always be a pleasure.
Let's take a look around the rest of the league. This is SEC Through.
You ready for week 1? Boy, I tell you what I am, man. I cannot wait for these games. I am so ready to sink my teeth into all of them. We're going to talk more about a lot of this stuff with our guy Jake Fromm here coming up in a moment. Prior to that, though, let's get ready to go cruising around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. And getting ready, man. A lot of exciting things happening around Royal Caribbean. And, of course, for all of you, I want you thinking about exciting stuff going on with Royal Caribbean and DawgNation here very soon, too. As I told you, I want you kind of thinking long range when it comes to stuff involving Royal Caribbean. That means next April, not too soon by a long shot, to start thinking about Utopia of the Seas and your chance to be with us on the next DawgNation cruise. I hear people say all the time, hey, BA, I want to be on that DawgNation cruise. Well, this year in 2026, that's going to be your year to do it. You will love Utopia of the Seas. It's the latest, the newest in the Oasis class of ship. It's an unbelievable vessel, just one of the most exciting things you can ever be a part of. Our friend Jessica Slater wants to tell you all about it. You can give her a call, 770-718-9147. That's 770-718-9147. You can also email her, jslater@dreamvacations.com. Whether it's our DawgNation cruise in April, the soon-to-be debut of Star of the Seas, Icon of the Seas, Wonder of the Seas, any of the other great Royal Caribbean cruise ships, you deserve a Royal Caribbean cruise vacation. I hope you get one as 2025 prepares to turn into 2026. All right, we're going to get Jake Fromm here coming up in just a second. Let's talk a little bit more about this coaches poll release kind of before we get there, just quickly, just for a moment. So I asked Connor, important question. There's almost always a preseason top 10 team that finishes unranked, I would focus on two teams right now, both near the back end of that top 10. One of them for me would be Miami. Now, here's the issue when it comes to Miami. I do think they're trying to kind of reinvent themselves here a little bit. But y'all, for those of you who follow college ball closely, who is Carson Beck going to throw the ball to? Because Miami has lost a lot from its receiver core a year ago. And from Carson Beck's standpoint, kind of probably ironic in the wrong way, in that, probably frustrated by some drops and some things like that at Georgia a year ago. Now he goes to Miami, where his receiving core is also not going to be as stout as it perhaps was for Cam Ward last season. I'll say the same thing about LSU. While I don't think or at least a similar thing about LSU, I don't think LSU falls flat this season. I believe they'll probably beat Clemson in week 1, I think. If they don't, after as much focus and attention has been paid to that, I think you got to be really, really careful if you're LSU, just given how awkward that situation sometimes feel. A lot of pressure on them week 1 against Clemson. They have ratcheted some of that up themselves. A lot going on there. Also, if you like having fun with this, well, if a top 10 team finishes unranked, could an unranked team finish in the top 10? Well, first of all, that happens a lot, more than you probably realize. A candidate for that this season might feel like Oklahoma. A lot of offseason attention, not ranked for the first time since 2019 in the preseason coaches poll. If you wanted me to be a little contrarian, just kind of put something out there a little bit, slightly to a small degree, keep your eye on Missouri. Just slightly to a small degree, keep your eye on Missouri. That's sort of just for fun, but it's worth considering. Also, I'll tell you two other things real quick. I think a couple of the SEC teams that are the most interesting with their ranking. Ole Miss was ranked higher than I thought they would be, given the relative lack of fanfare this season. A year ago, it's heralded transfers, it's preseason top 10. The chatter around Ole Miss this offseason has not seemed to be that substantial. Now, from a win total standpoint, they're ranked about where they're supposed to be. Their projected win total is about 8.5. They are kind of right there in the top 15. That's about right. But boy, it doesn't really match what the offseason conversation has necessarily been. I find that to be interesting. And the last one I'll give you is way down near the bottom part of the top 25. Down near the bottom is Texas A&M. 21st, I believe it is. Yeah, 21st for the Aggies. Y'all, if you care about preseason, FPI, some of the analytics stuff, Texas A&M is a preseason top 10 team in the analytics. So big divide between the math nerds and the human voters when it comes to Texas A&M. A pretty interesting contrast on that. And if you want to, we'll go ahead and bring the music down, and we'll call that Cruising Around the SEC, courtesy of Royal Caribbean. Because on a Tuesday, we want to jump right to him. Always love this conversation. Our guy, Jake Fromm, as part of a Kroger Fresh Take here on DawgNation Daily, presented by Kroger. Jake, it's great to have you here. Appreciate your time as always, and we hope you're doing great here today.
Always glad to be on the show, Brandon. Thank you for having me.
So I was telling Connor a minute ago that just like a kid, I still love the polls. I think they're fun. I think they're more predictive than people realize. And frankly, as opposed to being ranked, a little lower, I kind of like Georgia coming in at number 4. And it's not just it's the rat poison because, or it's not just that. For me, if you're preseason number 12, if you're preseason number 19, then guess what? You're probably not winning the national championship. But if you're coming in somewhere in that sort of top 4, top 5, if you're somewhere in that range, history would suggest in the college ball playoff era, you were still right there in that range of a team that could win the national championship. I got to tell you, I take some comfort from that. Do you agree?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think you're exactly right on being in that sweet spot. I think, 1 through 4, 5, maybe 6, every now and then 1 kind of in that 7 to 10 range makes a scare of it. But I think they're right where they need to be. I think kind of when you look at it of who's returning, NIL spending, recruiting, all the different factors coming into play. I mean, I think that's a good place to be. I think it gives enough motivation that people are doubting you, but then also enough respect of like, hey, yeah, we're going to be as good as we should be because everybody thinks so as well. So I think they're in a great sweet spot, just like you mentioned.
I also said this before you joined us, which is if you look at the Georgia teams that have won it, from preseason number 3 to number 1 in the 2022 season. I don't think a lot of people realized just how good this offense could be. Stetson became a finalist for the Heisman. Brock Bowers, Ladd McConkey, they were essentially unstoppable weapons. Georgia was more explosive offensively than people realize. In 2021, they go from preseason number 5 to eventually number 1 at the end of the season. While Georgia was given credit for being a good team and having a good defense, Kirby Smart typically did and had one. I don't think folks realized they were going to have 5 first-round picks off that defense. It was more historically good than people realized. I would say your 2017 team that played for a national title, I was obviously way better in almost every aspect than they were maybe given credit for before that season began. As a player on that team, I know you were a young guy, but did you ever have a moment like preseason where you're like, gosh, I think we may be way better than people realize? I mean, or, was there ever that moment of, man, people are sort of casting us aside, but honestly, I like my team here. Did you ever have one of those moments around that time? Because obviously that was an example of a season in which your guys clearly outplayed your preseason ranking.
For me coming in at that time, it was, hey, I just want to make sure I knew what everybody was doing on offense, trying to figure out college football, spring practice. I was just trying to figure out where I fit into the whole grand scheme of things. So as far as national championship aspirations, to be quite honest with you, man, I was so in my own world. I was trying to figure it all out. But I think when you go back and look at it, the skill of players was there. I mean, you kind of look around the roster. I mean, high caliber players were littered up and down the roster. Nick, Sony, Roquan, Isaiah Wynn, Dav, Lorenzo, you name it. I mean, there were guys up and down that roster. And when you can collectively have success as a team, that only just increases everyone's, draft potential and so on and so forth. But I think a lot of it we figured out along the way, and we kind of figured out how good we were. And I think, a big turning point in that was going up and playing Notre Dame and like, oh, okay, hey, I think we are for real and we can do this, and just kept building and stacking on wins as we went.
Yeah, and I love talking about this because I have such fond memories of that year. But I'll tell you the way it kind of worked for me was, okay, so y'all go to Notre Dame. Previous year, you weren't on the team. Georgia only won 8 games. Notre Dame had a losing record. So we didn't necessarily know that either Georgia or Notre Dame was going to be good, but y'all won a good game. It's almost like a baseball game, right? It's kind of low scoring. Every moment matters. Clutch plays at the end. And y'all won the thing. And then after that, 2 weeks later, and I think we've talked about this before, so Mississippi State comes into Athens, and there was stuff all week, and I don't know how much you paid attention to this, but there was stuff all week of Mississippi State's going to pull the upset, and this is a sneaky type situation here, and obviously it's the famous flea flicker that you threw and Terry Godwin catches, but y'all narrow favorite that day, y'all blew them out, and at that moment, I was like, well, not flat from post Notre Dame. Schedule lines up pretty easy here the rest of the way. Tennessee, Florida, teams like that weren't quite as good as they had been. It was that Mississippi State game for me when y'all just blew doors where I was like, gosh, this team's probably pretty good, because that was certainly a more dominant performance than I think a lot of people expected. Do you have that same kind of memory of that game?
Yeah, absolutely. They were littered on defense with all kinds of NFL talent. I remember coming in and seeing the scouting report that week, and every defensive lineman was 6'5" to 6'7". I mean, they were just like, okay, hey, this is it's my first SEC football game. This is what SEC football is. Everybody's huge, everybody's strong, everybody's fast. And so it was kind of a welcome to the SEC moment for me. I also remember coming in on Monday morning, and Kirby is just hot. He is hot. I don't know if you know this, Brandon, and I don't know if the viewers know this, but Kirby and Dan Mullen, they got a thing, and they're definitely rivals when they are anything football related. So Kirby wanted to win that game very bad, and he wanted to make a statement, and we sure did.
That's a great story. I love to hear that. That's awesome. So a topic that I have talked to you about a million times over the course of the last few months came up again last week. Kirby Smart was just sort of offhanded comments. Sometimes it's the offhanded comments that end up being the most interesting. Smart was talking about with the running game, we got a quarterback we can kind of do some stuff with. And I think a lot of us, certainly me, guilty of reading too much into things sometimes, of course, but I think we take that as, okay, well, maybe Gunnar Stockton, I'm not saying he's Lamar Jackson, that's not what I'm saying, but maybe the best of Gunner this year does include, a little bit more with the legs in some situation, some way. I will say that selfishly, that's what I hope to be true. Now, you can't put him in harm's way and get him hurt because you've got, inexperience with your backup quarterback right now to a degree too. But I do think for a Georgia team that's trying to unlock the running game, and I know this is well-traveled territory for us, but trying to unlock the running game, I just think any kind of way you can be creative with Stockton, I do think that makes it interesting. And I would say a couple of the remarks from Smart last week at least allude to that being a possibility. Jake, do you understand why most Georgia fans probably take that as a good thing?
Yes, I think when you're dissecting, Kirby and what he says, I think you can take this a couple different ways. One, you could take it, for what it is. It's a compliment to Gunner's athleticism. I think we can all agree. Gunner is athletic. Was a dual threat coming out of high school. Did a lot of great things in high school, running the football. Different league, but you could definitely see, the talent and the skill is there. Number two, you could see that this is an intent to get back to playing some hard-nosed, running the ball type of style football and on offense. I think the running game is only going to help Gunner, develop as a quarterback throughout this season and figure out how to be a starter this season. And then three, I would say it would show some type of confidence in Ryan Puglisi as a backup quarterback. The more you use Gunner in the run game, the more exposure that he has to risk and getting injured and those kind of bumps and bruises. So I would also take this as a compliment to Ryan Puglisi as well, that if need be, that he seems ready to come in and play.
I want to ask you one more topic before we let you go here. Let me remind folks, it's our Kroger Fresh Take with Jake Fromm here today on DawgNation Daily. And, of course, speaking of Kroger, when it comes to Kroger and all this stuff for back to school, now a lot of you are back to school already. You're certainly in the midst of that. Still a couple of stragglers out there haven't quite gotten back to school yet. Well, getting stocked up on everything you need for a great back-to-school experience, of course, our folks from Kroger have got that for you. I'm talking about lunch stuff to go in the lunchbox, those delicious, healthy meals at night for dinner to get you sort of boosted up and ready for the next day, the supplies, pencils, all the kind of stuff you got to have. You got to have Kleenex in the classroom, all that kind of stuff. Get stocked up on everything you need at your local Kroger. The back-to-school experience made so much better. And if you become a Kroger Boost member, well, it's an even more convenient way to enjoy the stuff that you're already buying there at your local Kroger. So make sure you check that out here today as you get ready to go back to school. Jake, let me finish with this. Tomorrow on Wednesday, we're going to hear from a handful of Georgia assistant coaches, including our kind of only time sort of pre-bowl game to hear from Georgia offensive coordinator Mike Bobo. At the beginning of the calendar year, Bobo probably taking a lot of slings and arrows, some from the media, some from fans. Seems like that's kind of quieted down here a bit. I would say it's just sort of factually true that Georgia needs to be better offensively than it was a year ago. I don't necessarily draw a straight line between that, though, and Bobo necessarily. I think that Georgia had a number of issues that it was dealing with last season. But I'm also not a former player necessarily. And when it comes to, what's actually happening from a game playing standpoint, my ability to sort of understand some of that kind of stuff is going to be probably just a little bit limited. So I'm curious from you watching this from kind of a quarterback's eye, what do you think of Mike Bobo as an offensive coordinator on this day before we get a chance to hear from him tomorrow?
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting to hear from Coach Bobo tomorrow. In my experience, assistant coaches, they either love getting this opportunity to speak to the media because they never get to do it, or they absolutely hate it and really don't want anything to do with it. They just want to coach ball and deal with X's and O's and their guys. But, Coach Bobo, he's really progressed as a play caller. I think the time spent with Coach Monken was really, really good. And I think good for everybody as a whole at the University of Georgia of kind of being able to see just different schemes, different ways of doing things, motions, formations, and I would say more of kind of an aggressiveness. I think Coach Bobo comes with that, and I think there is a longer leash that Kirby is giving offensive coaches to have on offense. So it's going to be really interesting to see what Coach Bobo does with that leash and the comfort level that he has with Gunner on offense and the kind of decisions that he can make moving forward. I think it is such a understood and maybe kind of forgotten about is the trust level that the head coach has in the quarterback, and that the offensive coordinator has in the quarterback to make a bad play a good play, and to not make a bad play a worser play. So, I think this is all going to kind of play in the it depends category, and it's going to be really fun to see in that first game what the intent, what the scheme is, and how much they'll let Gunner get after it.
Jake, really appreciate your time. Your insight always incredibly valuable to us. Thrilled to have you here. We'll look forward to, and as each of these weeks, we're getting closer and closer to the start of the season, the real games. You love all of that. So thank you for being a part of this Kroger Fresh Take. We'll look forward to speaking to you very soon.
Yeah, thank you, Brandon. See you next week.
Great stuff there from Jake Fromm. And speaking of great stuff, before we wrap up here today, let me remind you, one of Jake's great moments in a Georgia uniform, a blowout win at Tennessee back in 2017. Well, guess what? Georgia's been earning blowout wins up there at Neyland Stadium basically every trip since then, too. We think 2025, same thing can maybe be true. Either way, we're going to start the day in style with our DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. This unbelievable tailgate experience is something we would love for you to be a part of. Tickets are going fast. Supplies last. Obviously, a phrase you got to use on this, while supplies last, when it comes to those DawgNation invasion T-shirts. This is an unbelievable experience. First 125 to sign up, get one of the DawgNation Invasion T-shirts on board the riverboat on the Tennessee River. You're going to have DawgNation team there. We're doing DawgNation shows, all kinds of entertainment, a really great buffet. You get the bar. You get all of the fun stuff included there in your price. And while you can, you got to jump on and be a part of this. Keep in mind, previous years when Georgia's gone up there, it's been in November. This, however, is a September date. That means right now in August, we're making plans for these early season games, including the big DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee riverboat there, kind of taking over and painting that town red and black. Tennessee fans don't like it, but we're going to own that Tennessee River on this particular day. It's going to be a gorgeous sight to see the DawgNation flag flying. Last time we were there, got SEC Network TV coverage because they were so impressed by the full-fledged takeover that we were part of. Well, guess what? We're about to do it all over again here in 2025. Want you to be a part of it. Go to DawgNation.com/tailgate for more on that. That is DawgNation.com/tailgate for a lot more on that today. We'll see you at the DawgNation invasion on the Tennessee River. And also, before we get ready to wrap up today, let me also give a quick shout out to our friends at Daytona Beach here, too. We're kind of late summer. You kind of look around, you see on social media, all your friends are taking their vacation and they're doing all kinds of fun stuff. You're like, you know what? I hadn't had a summer vacation yet. And honestly, you probably hadn't had one because you forgot to plan one. Well, guess what? If you're sort of late to the game here, haven't planned your summer vacation yet, did you know there's a great opportunity for you at Daytona Beach here right now, because there's so many wonderful hotels and fabulous resorts that the savings opportunities still exist even in late summer, just simply because of the tremendous selection that exists at a place like Daytona Beach. It's 23 miles of shoreline, for instance. There's also an airport that you can fly straight from Atlanta to get there, so it's super convenient. This is a place that I grew up going to. Some of my best childhood memories are right there at Daytona Beach, but I love the fact that new memories being made at Daytona Beach all the time. So find out more online today, DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals. That is DaytonaBeach.com/hotel deals today. A couple of golden shoes as we get ready to say goodbye to you here today on the first of our 10th anniversary broadcast. We celebrated that yesterday. Very nice message, and many of you have kind of shared these. I'll show you one of these here as part of a golden shoe today. John Adams on X saying, I can't remember if it's day 1 or day 30, but I was right there at the beginning when the podcast started. He said we should go back and kind of replay some of our early episodes, maybe kind of look at some blasts in the past. John, at a certain point, we may do that. Of course, our history from 2015 through spring of 2017, we were just audio only. Didn't start video until 2017, but some of those early podcasts, my guess is over the course of the next few months, you may certainly hear some of those. Great suggestion coming from you. We'll also give you a golden shoe from being one of our longtime friends. We appreciate that. Also, yesterday, Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic Kickoff Luncheon. Had a chance to stand there with my good friends Matt Stewart, Rusty Manziel. We'll have the calls coming up on television here over the course of the next week, starting on Wednesday. A lot of fun, including the Saturday games all right there on Atlanta News First, Channel 46 here in Atlanta. That's going to be a great time. We'll give golden shoes out to Matt, Rusty, and everybody else who was on hand for us with us at the Corky Kell Dave Hunter Classic kickoff luncheon yesterday. Great to be able to see that. So we'll certainly be excited about all of that. What we're not excited about, those lousy, stinking Gators. About 1,732 days. That's how long it's been since Florida's beaten Georgia. That's our Gator Hater Updater. Y'all have a great day. See you back here tomorrow. DawgNation Daily, presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then. And on video, time now for the R.S. Andrews Cool Down. R.S. Andrews, when you turn to for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, and electric needs, they show up on time, do the work that's promised, the price that's promised. You can trust them on all of that. All right, let us get some comments here. Foster Moss says, I look like the future governor of Georgia. Well, listen, our state's probably falling on hard times if I'm the governor, but you never know. You never know. If drafted, I will serve. How about that? If drafted, I will serve. Anonymous handle battling our buddy G. Grace here. Frank Patterson also pointing out, this is another thing that makes the preseason top 10 interesting. He says 6 of them have new, inexperienced quarterbacks, meaning no more than 1 or 2 starts in meaningful time. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I have downplayed a little bit some of the ongoing conversation around Gunnar Stockton, because in the big games that Stockton will play, for the most part, he is also playing against quarterbacks of a similar level of experience to him. For instance, first big road game in the SEC, that's always a challenge. But in that particular game, Stockton will likely have more experience than whoever he's playing against, at least in SEC play. Aguilar, McIntyre, Merklinger, whoever it turns out to be. You know, Stockton's played in a playoff game. He's led a team to an SEC championship win. I'll take that experience in that spot. Same type of deal. You know, Alabama, 2 weeks later, you know, big game. Alabama's going to be a top 10 team. I think they're pretty good. But Ty Simpson, you know, similar story to Stockton, a guy who's kind of hung around, been a part of the program. You kind of wonder about him after all these years. You know, that's a game in which exceeding the quarterback play from your opponent from Gunnar, not an impossible thing to do. And then you get in some of the other games too. It's like Jackson Arnold, new starter for Auburn, although he's played in the SEC. Austin Simmons, new starter for Ole Miss. You know, you look up and down the list, there are only a small number of examples where the quarterback that Stockton's going to be playing is far more experienced than he is, and I do think that's important. Jerry Dogfan says, when was your first show on video? Did you start out with, it begins right now? We did start out that way. I believe DawgNation Daily, begins right now. I believe I've said that every episode. I do. And the reason why is, like, if somebody stumbled onto our show now and they watched the whole thing from beginning to end, it would be a little confusing, because the way it seems now is we sort of start and end multiple times. But when we first started on video, all of that was sensible from the standpoint that we were bringing the podcast to video. We were going to do the established podcast on video. That's why I say and on video, is because that was my signal at the end of the show that the podcast is done, and I'm talking to all of you on video just for a moment. That's kind of what that was. Now, that's kind of stretching to something longer and longer and longer. But to begin with, that was just sort of a couple of minutes worth of me just talking to the video audience once the podcast was done. Same thing at the beginning. When I would start the show, it'd be like, hey, you know, got a really fun show for you. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So what do you say we get it started? And I would always sort of begin it that way. So a little bit of a preamble at the beginning, a little bit of sort of a postlude at the end. And that's just kind of what we did around the podcast as it had always been. That's weird now to people, because it's like the show starts, then it starts again, then at the end we conclude it, then we sort of do another finish. It's like there's a lot of like moving parts at the beginning and the end here, but all of that is kind of around in sort of an established parameter that was, hey, there's this podcast we've been doing, now we're doing it on video, and that was sort of that. Wyatt Phil would like to hear David Pollock on the show again. Yeah, David's been a great guest throughout the years. Maybe we'll do that again here very soon. Jonathan Aaron remembering a couple of great memories. Davin Bellamy saying, humble yourself. Jake Fromm with the singing Rocky Top. The Fromm thing was probably top in comparison there on that, simply because I was standing right there when Jake sang Rocky Top. I was standing right there for that. So that was really cool. The humble yourself from Davin Bellamy, I only heard about that after the fact. Now, it was very close after the fact, and I was so happy about that because honestly, like a lot of Georgia fans, Baker Mayfield had really kind of rubbed me the wrong way. So the fact that Davin called him out, I thought it was great. And, Davin was one of those guys that was really kind of before his time, because I'm going to give you more than you care about. This is sort of like business 101 for like 2 seconds, is that just because you have branding does not mean you have a brand. There are a lot of recruits that have branding. They have a logo, they have things like that, they have merch, and I'm not trying to disparage, but to be honest, no one buys that because you can walk up and down the streets. You've never seen like anyone wearing a t-shirt of some other player's logo for the most part, unless it's like sort of like the Jordan Jumpman or, these sort of extreme examples. That branding doesn't necessarily equal a brand. But the thing that does take off are like slogans. And Davin, kind of tried to make the humble yourself t-shirts after that Rose Bowl game. But the screen printing game was a lot different back then. If you wanted to sell t-shirts, you had to print the t-shirts. And so basically you had to like carry inventory and things like that. The internet didn't quite work the same way in 2017, the way that it does now. The point is, had humble yourself happen in the NIL age, with screen printing being a little bit of a lower barrier to entry than it used to be, I think Davin could have really sold a bunch of those t-shirts. I don't know how many he sold in 2017. Maybe he sold a lot. I hope he did. But had humble yourself happen now, you could really sell a bunch. And this is something that, we have recruits that watch our show. This is something that y'all should remember, is that if you like look at wrestling for a moment, no one buys a t-shirt that says Stone Cold Steve Austin. They buy a t-shirt that says Austin 316. It's the phrase that makes the t-shirt. That if you can connect your name to a phrase, that's what slogans have always been. If you can connect your name to a phrase, well, now you've got branding that actually functions as a brand. Davin had kind of figured that out at a time in which the barrier to entry to sell that stuff was just a little bit more complicated. Had that same thing happened here now, that I think would have been a much bigger business potentially. Anonymous Handle says, how long did it take the podcast to find traction at the beginning? So this is one of those things, and obviously I'm a person of faith, so I think of this as a blessing, but there's also a way to describe this as just sort of dumb luck, that I think it took people a couple of days to figure out that that this podcast was a thing. But really very early on, within the first couple of weeks, we were doing, I don't care about numbers, things like that, but we were doing pretty big numbers within the first couple of weeks. And within the first month, we were just sort of off and running. And I'm very thankful for that. It was easier to, technology-wise, it's easier to start a podcast now. The barrier to entry technology-wise is way easier. Technology-wise, things were a little bit more complicated back then. But just to be honest with you, the market wasn't quite as saturated with podcasts the way that it is now. And I'll tell you the best decision I ever made. And once again, I don't take a lot of the credit for this. I just think of this as divine providence or just dumb luck. I guess whatever your beliefs are, you can decide for yourself. But when I was asked what I wanted this show to be, and I did have a good bit of freedom at crafting it from the very beginning, the one thing that I said was, I think it's important that we do it every day. And I do think doing it every day, Monday through Friday, I think it kind of gave people an idea that this was a different thing than perhaps they'd ever experienced before. And to this day, it's still the one unique characteristic I believe that I have. And so that was a huge, huge thing. And it sounds immodest, and I don't mean for it to, but thankfully we found a pretty big audience, like right from the beginning. This is in 2015. This is pre-Kirby Smart. This is in 2015. It just sort of seemed like just somehow, some way, like I said, divine providence, dumb luck. Decide for yourself which one you think it is. It just sort of seemed like we came along at the exact right time, providing something that didn't previously exist, that just sort of met the moment in a way that I was proud of. Foster Moss says, I was the first to do the show with live comments. That's what set it apart. That was a thing to me because when we started in 2015, the idea of streaming video was very different. There were some Facebook Lives, but that was like hold the phone up and just talk to the chat. But I did get the sense that, I could probably do that. I could talk to people. And to this day, I think we are still the most interactive show. I don't read a lot of chat during the show because I like to try to stay focused on what I'm doing. When we used to do SEC Country Live, I would read from the chat during that show. Every now and then I'll read a comment during the show. I mostly keep our chat stuff contained to this particular segment, but I do like the show to be very interactive. Anonymous Handle says pre-2020 were the prime time for starting podcasts. Yeah, I would say pandemic changed that because, if you go back and look at some of the stuff we were doing in 2020, for instance, we were, our technology was pretty Spartan back then even. Like now when we do a show remotely, it's basically still the same show. Whereas in 2020, that was not the case at all. Not the case at all. But around that time, because people were sort of forced to stay home more, even like Rogan and some of those guys took off in 2020 in a way that they had not previous to that. In fact, if you go back and watch like an old Joe Rogan, kind of like pre-pandemic, it feels like a completely different show. It was just much, much larger in that era and beyond. But the point is like we all, I think, became more acquainted with, the streaming technology, the remote chat technology. And on the one hand, there's always trade-offs in life. On the one hand, that made doing a show much easier for a lot of people. On the other hand, it just became a pretty saturated market if you weren't doing something that was really specific to a certain group of people. Wyatt Fielden says, when do we start doing post-game shows in the bookstore? So that was one of the first things we did video-wise. We were actually doing those in the 2016 season. So before we were doing DawgNation Daily on video, we were doing our post-game show on video from the bookstore. We're not doing road games back then, but we were doing home games at the bookstore. And that's another thing. Streaming from a game day, my gosh, that used to be such a pain. Oh my gosh, because y'all know this, you go into the stadium, you can't use your phone. Well, guess what? If you can't use your phone to like text your friend, you sure as heck can't stream from in a stadium. So like back then we needed like Ethernet, hardwire internet. You don't need that as much anymore. But boy, we needed it back then. So totally different situation. Garrison Tucker says, BA, the Lord provided. Well, I certainly believe that. I do. I could have never done this on my own. I really couldn't. And, if God gives it to you and you got to be, very open to the possibility that one day God will take it all away. But nonetheless, we're going to keep doing it as long as we have that opportunity. DT says, 10 years of DawgNation Daily on the way to 50. He says, the Vin Scully of college football. Let me tell you this. I've told you before, that is my goal. That is my goal. My goal is to one day have a bunch of people much younger than me huddled into a boardroom trying to, figure out how they convince me to sort of step down, to retire, to give it all up. what do we do about BA? How do we get him to ride off in the sunset? I ain't never doing it. I ain't never, bad grammar intentional. As long as I am healthy enough to stagger into this studio and sit here and do it, I plan on. Now, listen, the world changes, right? When we started in 2015, you couldn't envision that one day the show would look like this because that's not what existed. So some of this is going to require pivoting to whatever the world starts to look like. So if you think about, God willing, many decades down the road, how that could look different, could look very different. But, my belief is, even if I also do other things, because I do have other aspirations, even if I also do other things, God willing, my plan is to do a Georgia football show for every day that I'm healthy for the rest of my life. To be, and even in the conversation of a Vince Scully, obviously not from a talent standpoint, but just from a longevity standpoint, still doing a very good job at 90. No better thing could be said of me than that. That is my hope. There is no retirement. There's no idea of retirement. Not even 40 years from now. UJ Marine says that people used to make money kind of selling the anti-Brian Bosworth t-shirts. That's another one of those guys. They could have kind of that was branding that actually was a brand. I think that's probably true. Garrison Tucker says, who was your media inspiration for getting into the industry? So when I was a kid, I was super media obsessed. I kind of learned pretty early, big sports fan, but it just sort of occurred to me one day when I was a kid, I was like, I'm not the best player on my little league team. My little league team is just sort of one team in one league, a small part of a bigger state. There are 50 states in the entire country. You start doing the math in your head and you start realizing, oh, you know what? I guess I'm probably not likely to play Major League Baseball. I don't remember specifically what day it was and where I was, but I remember the kind of broadly speaking general moment when I was like, boy, I'm probably not going to play Major League Baseball. And you start thinking, okay, well, what's plan B? What's plan B? And that's where I came really fixated with the idea of being a broadcaster somehow. No bigger inspiration for me than obviously Larry Munson. Larry Munson is the ultimate inspiration. There were others, but that's the biggest of them all. And yeah, I mean that was it. That was it. Let's see what else. Third Will says he would illegally vote for me for governor, even though he lives in Florida. Will, I appreciate that. That's really funny. I appreciate that. SEM Dog says, happy anniversary and congratulations on 10 years. A show like this takes a lot of hard work from a lot of people. It shows. Thanks for feeding our habit. Well, I appreciate that. I'll say two things about that. Thing number one is this, is that, I have the easy job here in the fact that I get to sit here and speak. You wouldn't believe the work that goes on behind the scenes, especially now. When we first started the show, and I promise I won't make this whole thing about me, but when we first started the show, my goal is I didn't want the show to be so complicated that I couldn't personally do it. I didn't want to be, I have trust issues, just totally honest. So I didn't want to be at someone else's, I didn't want to be dependent on someone else, is what I'm trying to say. And so I wanted to keep the show simple enough that I could do it myself, because you can't always trust that you'll have somebody else. Well, over the course of time, that ship has clearly sailed. The stuff we do video-wise now, for instance, the video you see on your screen, the social clips that we share, there's a lot that's so far beyond my ability that you can't even measure it. So the people that work on this show, I'm amazed by them. Kaylee Manziel and Cody Chafin's there here today, Jay Black. We have people like Kamal and Danny Jack that kind of help us out, some in addition to that. But it's really amazing the video operation that this has become, and I'm really proud of that. It makes me a little nervous because, as I said before, it's certainly beyond the borders of what I initially sort of was comfortable with, but boy, it's turned out to be a great thing. I really appreciate that. And the other point I was going to say about what SEM said is that, so I had somebody the other day ask me this, who's not maybe a huge sports fan, of like, what about football attracts me to the show, attracts me to doing this sort of work. And I obviously love football, of course, but the thing that really attracts me to the show is the establishing of the daily habit. That's the phrase that SEM used. I like the idea of making life just a little bit more enjoyable for the people who consume the product. And listen, I'd love nothing more than to be as funny as the funniest comedian, or as smart as the smartest person, or as handsome as the best looking movie star, whoever that might be. I'd love to be all of those things. I can only be what I am. But if that sort of continued presence in someone's life makes a workout a little easier to get through, a morning commute a little more, tolerable, time in a cubicle a little more satisfying, if it can just make the day a little bit better for the people who choose to kind of keep up the habit, boy, no better way for my profession to be served than that. Because listen, when I leave here, I'm just like you. I'm driving to get somewhere. I drive a very long way. I'm racing to get my kids somewhere. I'm trying to get through a workout. Believe it or not, I do try to do that sort of thing. When I am not doing the show, I am no different than any of the people who listen to the show. And so if I can find something to listen to that just sort of makes it a little bit more enjoyable, whatever it is that I'm trying to do, that's just sort of the stuff of life sometimes. Miriam Corbin says she started watching 2015. I just had retired and was looking for shows that talked about my dogs. She says, you absolutely fit that bill 100%. Well, I appreciate that. I really do. Miriam, very, very thankful. And Miriam, by the way, and I still have this going back a long time in the past, she did the Friends of DawgNation Daily tailgate and made some great stuff up. And in fact, I've got some of that in my new house here right now. I appreciate that. By the way, Brian Lindsay, this is important to keep in mind. He says, Georgia's undefeated when I say Brian's name on a Friday before the game day. Brian, that's important information. I appreciate you sharing that. We'll have to make sure we do that 16 times here coming up over the course of the next few weeks. Brian Whitaker says he fell upon this podcast around 2019 or so. So I've been hooked ever since, especially being a lifelong dog fan. Well, I appreciate that. And listen, you kind of want both, just to be honest. You love hearing people who've been with us almost the entire time. That's incredibly gratifying. But at the same time, you like the idea that, hey, people are still finding the show, new people are coming in, and I'm thrilled to have that, especially in the case of someone like Brian, who's a big part of our community and participates in the chat and things like that. I really appreciate that for sure. By the way, Brene Blackburn getting ready to check in back to work. And she was kind enough to let me know the other day. I guess her name, looks like it would be Berna, but I believe it's pronounced Brene. So glad to have her here, even if she has to check out here a little earlier. Jane Armistead says she's also been with us since about 2017, which I love. So the first video studio we ever had, just be honest, it was a little bit ugly. It's like it was meant to be temporary. All we had was like the vinyl step and repeat. We had two of them. We had one here, kind of made one over here, kind of formed a little bit of a corner. That's all we had. And it was literally just in like an office. I mean, not fancy at all. It was from there, though, that we kind of started getting what I think of as sort of like real studios. And boy, we went through a bunch of them. It's amazing how frequently we've moved, but somehow we've sort of found a home every time we have. Ken Holcomb says, I really hope you're able to achieve your longevity goal. I do too, Ken. Obviously, none of that is in any of our control, right? We certainly understand that. And, you can't count on anything in the future, but boy, I'm going to try. I really am going to try to be able to do that. And, one way or another, just want to make every moment count, right? DT, very funny. Let us see what else. Let me go back up to YouTube here for a moment. Anonymous Handle mentioning the Tennessee video. Yeah, we talked about this yesterday with the quarterback being blurred out of this. Stuff like that is so weird. So weird. By the way, there was another. So we gave you an example of 2 weird videos yesterday. I guess the NFL's also got their version of this too. Apparently, the Chicago Bears. Did y'all see the video of Caleb Williams the other day throwing the ball, towards the net and just misfiring left and right? Apparently, the Bears got so much grief from that they deleted that video. So I guess some of this does go on the NFL too. Reminded me of a video a couple of years ago that Florida shared with Emory Jones when he was their quarterback that did not look particularly good. So I guess we also have an example in the NFL of video being concealed here. All of that's pretty weird. Tim Jackson on YouTube, thank you for the kind words. I appreciate that. Thank you, Tim. Roger Rivas also on the subject of Carson Beck at Miami. Well, listen, if Beck is healthy, he certainly has the capability of having a big year. As I said before, I am a little suspicious of what kind of wide receivers he's going to be throwing to there at Miami right now. Perhaps they'll turn out to be very good. Here we are having a nice conversation. George Wrigley says, B.A., why would you retire? You got 4 months of vacation. Now, that's not true, George. That's funny, but it's not true. In fact, y'all don't realize how sad I've been the last couple of days. I was supposed to go on Star of the Seas like right now. I'm not going to be able to, but I was supposed to go. I got the invitation to go. Had to send regrets. Getting accused of taking 4 months of vacation. Boy, that's tough. That's tough. Jerry Dog Fan also said, "I'm like Noah, and then I spend a lot of time on a boat." Y'all are all over me. That's really funny. That is very funny. All right, let's see what else. Let's do a couple more, then we're gonna have to go. Sandy Price says, "Congratulations to you and your team for the wonderful job you do. Never try to miss the live shows." He says, "I am disabled. Sometimes at my doctor's appointment, I miss them." Well, listen, Sandy, we appreciate you being here when you can. And, as I said, doctor's appointments, things like that, whatever we can do to make it a little bit more tolerable, we certainly do that. And you're a big part of our community, Sandy. So thank you very much. That means a lot to me. I really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Johnny Prescott says, "I spend more time with y'all than some of my family. Because what I'm saying is y'all are kind of like my family. Thanks for everything. BA, congratulations. The first of many milestones. I appreciate that." Yeah, it's kind of funny to go along with Johnny's point. And I'm obviously very pro-family, but I will say that anytime we ever do a video on one of the holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas-ish, we typically don't do shows Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Eve, Christmas Day, Memorial Day, 4th of July. There are, I guess, about 6 days that we don't do a show for, those being the 6. But if we've ever, say, pre-recorded a show for one of those days because of whatever might be going on at a given moment, depending on the news cycle, we might feel the need to be completely honest with you, they always do big numbers. They do. It sometimes only takes so much family. A new episode of DawgNation Daily pops up. Boom! People have a tendency to gravitate towards it. At least that's the assumption I've always made, that we try to go dark on the holidays because we want to give our people that are here a chance to enjoy their family and friends. But when we do put up holiday content, usually gets pretty good numbers. So apparently, Johnny and I'm not the only one who feels that way. Anything else? Foster Moss says 4 months of vacation. You go to all the games, get off on the holidays. BA's got the greatest job on earth. Well, I definitely feel like I do have that. Thankful to all of you who participate with me. I do appreciate that. By the way, how about this from Matt Rukavina? This is a nice image. Said, "I'm rocking my Georgia Tommy Bahama Hawaiian shirt on the way to Galveston with the family." I love that. I love that. Big fan of the tropical themed attire, given the fact that I like to spend so much time at tropical themed locations. I almost wore a tropical themed shirt on Friday just for the fun of it. Then I was like, I don't do this very much. It's going to shock people for the show anyway. So I decided not to, but I almost did the other day. Trevor Maffetone says, does R.S. Andrews service all of Georgia? You never know. You probably get them to come out no matter where you are. Tyrone Brown says, getting a lot of misinformation through the years. This show brings me all the news and need. I can inform my fellow dog fans throughout my life. Tyrone, what an awesome compliment that is. I really appreciate that. Thank you very much. Really, really appreciate that. Let us see what else before we go. I got to get ready to bounce out of here. Miriam Corbin, thank you for the kind words. I'm the hardest working podcaster anywhere. Well, I appreciate that, Miriam. It's nice of you to say. Nice of you to say. All right, final comments on all platforms, and we got to go. Good stuff. Rambo giving you a pity the fool. So as a family, we watched Rocky 3 for the first time the other night. My kids getting introduced to the Rocky franchise. Really enjoyed that. They thoroughly loved it, which I loved seeing it fresh and new through their eyes. Clubber Lang and Rocky 3 and all of that. Really very good. In fact, we were watching Rocky 3. We watch a little bit of a movie every night before everybody goes to bed. We were watching Rocky 3 the week that obviously Hulk Hogan passed away. And so that was just a weird kind of tie-in, very strange, but happy to go back and relive that. All right, let us see anything else. Somebody said they found the show via the algorithm. Let me see if I can read this. Oh, naturally. Let's try this again. Spencer Clark says the algorithm is how he found out about the show. Yeah, that's like also kind of the biggest change is that when we first started, finding a podcast was for the most part a pretty organic experience. YouTube has clearly changed a lot of that. And I guess I'm thankful that it has because it does create opportunities for other people to find the show. Terry Schnell, Terry Shell, thank you for the kind words. Appreciate that. The fact that so many of you would choose to make this an appointment and show up every day, I can't tell you how much that means to me. I mean that as sincerely as I'm capable. I really do. I thank you so much. Gary Holt, getting ready to check out. Gary, we got to do that today too. All right. Good stuff as always. Getting close to the start of the season. Looking forward to that. We appreciate you being a part of it with us. Y'all check out R.S. Andrews online, rsandrews.com for your air conditioning, heating, plumbing, electric needs. They show up on time. They do the work that's promised for the price promised. You can trust them on all of that. You absolutely can. They'll get you AC tuned back up. They'll get you cool and comfortable. Plenty of hot weather still on the way. Not this week, but plenty of it still on the way. Also, if you have a plumbing emergency, in many cases, they can sort of fix that for you the same day. Just make sure you find them online, rsandrews.com. Y'all have a great day. We're back tomorrow. DawgNation Daily presented by ServPro. We'll look forward to talking to you then.